We are both research universities, Harvard universities and MIT, and we love to start out with a research finding. So if I could do that, and if this works, then we'll be in good shape. All right, so research finding for the 21st century. What happened was executives such as yourselves, but CEOs specifically, representing Fortune 500 companies, were asked at the cusp of this century, in other words, at the end of last century, what kinds of skills they would like in their executives to succeed in the 21st century. So it was a very simple question. There was multiple answers that were given, but the summary is as follows. It came from Stanford Research Institute and Carnegie Mellon Foundation, by the way. I didn't attribute it to them, but they are the ones who conducted the survey. As I said, Fortune 500 CEOs. Success on the job long-term depends 75% on people skills and only 25% on technical knowledge and skills. Now, I'm from MIT. It has technology even in its name. This is heresy if they heard me say this too loud. Having said that, it really is something you should focus on is long-term. That's really the key here. At the front end of your careers, and all of you, if you can think of the front end of your individual careers, as you may be accountants, you may be finance people, you may be administrative people, you may be marketing and sales people, you may be HR people, you may be any number of disciplined area executives and or experts. But the fact of the matter is that expertise is still something that allows you to hold on to your job as you have it today. But when you look at what happened during the interim, which is after you received your credentials, and in fact they were extremely important at the front end of your career. So I tell the engineering graduates or would-be graduates at MIT that this is not applicable to them. They're at the front end of their careers, and 80 to 90% of the importance lies in their primary skills or the professional skills that they're there to attain. It is after you get through your middle part of your career and the tail ends of your career, and you look back, then this is certainly true. So this is what the Fortune 500 CEOs were conveying, that on a long-term basis, the success definitely depends on people skills and not necessarily the technical knowledge and skills which were prerequisites to that. With that said, in the global village context, and how many of you have heard the term global village? I suppose every one of you. And if you have, then it was coined by Marshall McLuhan, the media scholar, as some of you would remember, in 1961. So as early as that, he forecasted a global village in media terms, in terms of satellite television, etc. And in fact, in those terms, if you think about it, intercultural communication skills form a significant part of the required people skills that I just referred to in the previous slide. So intercultural communication skills are super, super important as we are getting into truly what global village is today compared to 1961 or 1968 when he coined the phrase or the term. So what has led to the global village? If you think about it, there have been advances in multiple areas. And this is where I throw it open and see where you can start contributing. But if we think of ourselves as a global village, and we truly are becoming that at a very fast rate, what is it that has contributed to it, not just in the last 10 years, but if you look at it in terms of last 50 years or so, and maybe even beyond, what kinds of things have led to today's global village? Communication technology is the first one which was mentioned, and internet is absolutely part and parcel of it. But prior to the internet, we also had satellite telecommunications, we had cellular technology. So technology in general in the communications area has enabled the world to become as small as it is today. Transportation, as you rightly put it, but certainly air travel. And so what can we think about transportation in terms of recent advances? Fast speed, aircraft, wide-bodied, etc. The fact that I came from JFK to Joburg direct couldn't be done 10 plus years ago. So all of those things are certainly bringing us closer together in transportation in general. Population migrations that we already referred to, but certainly it is not just a recent phenomenon, but you can go back hundreds of years in the case of certain civilizations, and you will start seeing certain routes that are happening there. That has led to cultural diversity, integration, and multiculturalism in so many cultures and so many countries that we look at. And certainly South Africa is an example of cultural diversity, but more importantly, integration that is more recent, and multiculturalism that is now part and parcel of how you conduct your life here, but certainly in the United States and Canada, those are equally applicable, and other parts of the world. Globalization of trade and commerce, and so when you said globalization, of course, there's trade and commerce that's going on, and effectively what we're saying is international economies face true interdependence. There is no such thing as a self-dependent economy. The United States may be the world's largest economy, but it relies so much on not only imports, but as you know, in terms of oil that all of us depend on, but exports as well. So it's a two-way street, and that's true of South Africa as well. So in that sense, we are becoming smaller and smaller, and these are the enablers, if you will, of where we are. Well, with that, we need to be cognizant of what that leads to are so many other things, and the role of culture. Why is it so important in business? And let me just tell you right now that intercultural communication is a fairly new area of study, as an academic area of study. It was only about 60 years ago that it started, and it was a cultural anthropologist called Edward Hall, an American one, who was in fact looking at American native tribes in Arizona, the Hopi and the Navajo tribes. And he started seeing certain differences between these tribes in terms of how they communicate within themselves and with each other. And that's what led to high context and low context cultures, which I won't get into too much. But he was asked as to why is it so important in business as opposed to just in general in terms of intercultural communication. And the answer he gave is, I think, fairly profound. The single greatest barrier to business success is the one erected by culture. So he came from the opposite side when he addressed it. And here he's not talking about just ethnic culture. He's talking about organizational cultures. He's talking about industry cultures. So culture in a more broader sense of the word. But nevertheless, he says the single greatest barrier to business success is the one erected by culture. Except whenever I talk to executives, that is not what they blame when things go wrong. It's always something else. It's always something else. And I'll show you how, in fact, sometimes it is those cultural differences that either make or break an international relationship. So it is very important that people come to grips with this, because they've had the ability to really attribute it to any number of things, and they may be right half the time, but a lot of the time they were wrong. It was a very indirect way of attributing something. So the cause and result effects were related in a way that was just convenient rather than by evidence. So here we go. One of the things we look at, social psychologists and cultural researchers, are the model called the cultural iceberg model. And so if you are from one culture and you're encountering another person from another culture, first of all, let's just talk about what you look at before we get into the analogy here. People make up their minds about people they encountered, not necessarily from another culture, just somebody new that you meet. And how long do you think it takes before people arrive at an initial judgment? And I'm not talking about recognition that somebody's from a particular race or is female or male. Those are things that are evidence-based. You know that that's true. I'm talking about reaching an initial judgment of another person. How long do you think it takes? On the average? 2 minutes, 10 seconds? So, okay, it's short. That much we're agreed upon. But I'm from MIT. I need a little more exacting answer. It happens to be 7 seconds. But in any case, the point is that's an average. So I wouldn't dwell on the 7 seconds. That's been derived through research and on an average basis. But the point is it's closer to 10 seconds than it is to 2 minutes. And it says that we're extremely judgmental. We're very fast in terms of determining and reaching an initial judgment. And how many times we've really reached a different kind of a judgment based on additional information that we've gathered about the very same person that you felt a certain way. That person is really not very communicative, and then you find out that that was just because you were having a telephone conversation. When you met in person, things happen. So even on a telephone where you don't see a person and therefore you have even less information, we reach judgments about people all the time. And the point I'm making is that we're very, very quick. So with that background or backdrop, let's just look at what is it that we are reacting to in those 7 seconds. It's what is visible. It is clearly, and again, I'm not talking about a telephonic conversation, let's just talk about an in-person conversation, where you're looking at behavior and what is visible, conscious, and in intercultural communication, we call it on-stage behavior. How much do you think is above the water level when you look at a total iceberg versus what's below, in terms of percentage? So 10 to 15%. perhaps is on top. And then the rest is at the bottom. But it is the 10 to 15% that we use to make a determination even after the 7 seconds. So 7 seconds is one thing, that's the initial primary judgment. And then you go off and you gather more information because there's so much more to gain by looking at a person, talking to a person. But that's still only 15 to 20%. And that is the crux of the matter that I want to communicate. We do make determination about people even after those first 7 seconds based on information that is visible and that's conscious. And yet there are so many things below the surface that really we need to consider before we can evaluate a person as to where they're coming from. What kinds of things do you think those are? The invisible, unconscious, or backstage factors are as follows. There are roots. They're very deep down. They come from your ancestors. They come from, we might want to attribute to grandparents and so on and so forth, that generation. But they're very deep. And this is what we don't realize because we're actually unconscious of it on a daily basis. But these roots are deeply embedded. There is no scientific argument about people's beliefs that come from roots. You don't have a scientific discussion on spirituality and whether something is right or wrong. It is deeply embedded. You believe it to be true for yourself and the family that you come from, and that's the end of that. It's after that that they form certain values. So the roots lead to beliefs, which lead to values, which then lead to attitudes, and those attitudes manifest themselves into behavior, which is what we react to. So sometimes we talk about people's attitudes because it's so close to the water surface. It's almost visible, but really it's the behavior that we are reacting to and we are attributing it to an attitude, but because they're close to each other. The values and beliefs are something that we need to uncover. It's generally what we don't uncover. Sometimes we think it's a very private matter, but the point is, on a long-term basis, if you want to have a relationship with an executive or a business person of another culture, you will need to get to that to really establish some kind of an effective relationship. And that requires time. So ethnocentric behavior is when you look at, I'll just define it, the conviction that one's own culture is normal and right, and the reference to measure other cultures. Which is why you will see here in the United States, British drivers, and I'll include South Africans, British and South African drivers drive on the wrong side of the road. Well, why don't you ask the South Africans about that, about which side the Americans drive on? It's automatic, it's unconscious, and it's really something we do all the time. Well, what kinds of results can that lead to? So we have to do analysis. You have to go below the surface. Always go below the surface. Do not take it at face value. That's really the main message I'm providing here. Internet globalization is allowing us to become a flatter society. No doubt about it. But culture is deeply embedded. It doesn't move very fast. It takes 50, 100 years to move even a little bit in historic terms. Important to understand what drives people of other cultures because it's their values. And I showed you the value differential. Once you study them, you start seeing the stark differences. It has huge business ramifications. One example was the Daimler-Chrysler merger in terms of outcomes of commercial relationships, particularly over the long term. Can we afford to ignore cultural differences in global business? You know the answer is resoundingly no. So I should end on a positive note, though, that South Africa is middle of the road. You have the ability to go either right or left much easier than those who are at the extremes. And with that thought, I leave you and say thank you very much.